So the third tip I would give is during the actual fight. I know it's really hard to do this, especially when your emotions are really riled up. But a quick tip is to start your sentences with I instead of you. For example, I feel, I sense, I think, I observe, I believe. Because when you start your sentences with I instead of you, it puts you in a position where you're talking about your own feelings and your own experiences. And it minimizes the opportunity for you to blame the other person during the fight. And when someone feels like they're being blamed, it's natural for them to defend themselves and in turn go on the offense and start blaming you as well. So it's kind of like blame, 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 blame. Like the person you start blaming, they're going to blame you, and then it just goes back and forth into this vicious cycle. And of course, when past fights are brought up, that's when both people go down resentment lane and start to bring up examples of when the other has let them down. So ideally, when a fight is over, the couple should actually feel closer together, have a better understanding of each other's perspectives, and a sense of clarity of how they're going to move forward. It becomes a slippery slope when either partner or both is dead set on being right. Because even though we call them fights, there actually are no winners or losers because you're working together as a team in your marriage or in your relationship. The desire to be right actually stunts the growth of a relationship and can actually deteriorate it to the point of destruction. Because it doesn't matter who's right. It forces the couple to be on different sides where each of them are focused on their own long-term goals separately and as individuals rather than as a couple. Ultimately, you want the fights to bring you guys closer together so that you can focus on your long-term goals together and really focus on the future. So now you've talked about the way that you've dealt with your anger and did some self-reflection on how your parents or those who raised you, how they dealt with anger and how they dealt with your anger. What you're going to do is you're going to discuss your anger management style with your partner, and you're going to imagine an ideal fight. And you have to clearly define what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So find a time when you're both calm and happy and content with each other. I know you kind of want to enjoy those moments, but it's also a really good time to talk about these things. And share with each other your fight styles or your anger management styles. This means going through the results of the self-reflection questions that we did in tips 1 and 2. Because when your partner understands how you manage your anger and what you've been through and why you are the way you are, it's easier for them to anticipate how you will be the next time an argument arises. So now imagine an ideal fight between you two. What would that look like? And it's not just about the words, but it's about the tone of voice, how quickly you're speaking, your body language, whether you're sitting up, sitting down, or standing up, the type of eye contact that you have. Some people don't want eye contact. Some people like eye contact. Do you want to be across the room, side by side, sitting together? What about the environment? So what's the best course of action if you start fighting in the public? What if you're out with friends? Can you guys wait until it's the end of the night and talk about it when you go home? Or is it ideally for you that you guys find a space to talk about it in the moment and then resume whatever you're doing? Also discuss your limitations when it comes to managing your anger. What are your boundaries? What are some specific examples that your partner does that makes you just get over the edge? Like you just cannot stand it, cannot tolerate, it's like this, it makes your tolerance become paper thin whenever your partner does these things. And then also ask yourself, what are some things that you can do to calm yourself down in that moment? And what can they do to help you calm down if one person's emotions are more heightened than the other and they sense that? Is there something they can do to help them manage their emotions so they can kind of get back to a little bit more of a neutral place? So the tip number 5 is, people don't tend to think about this, but ask for a timeout or let your partner have their timeout. You know, sometimes you get to a point in a fight where it feels like you're beating a dead horse and you're just talking in circles. And it's been going on for hours and hours and you're just exhausted. Or you're both so heated that it just becomes silent and no one's speaking. Or it's so heated that you're just talking over each other and you can't even make sense of what they're saying, you can't even make sense of what you're saying, you just want to be the loudest person. Or you just both keep adding to the conversation because neither of you wants to be both of you wants to be the person that has the last word. When you get to that point, it's the moment where you need to be physically apart. You need to take a moment to actually physically go into separate rooms, or this could be like in a basement, different rooms. One person can go outside, go for a drive, just be physically apart to take some time away from each other. And whoever asks for it, the other person has to respect it, trusting that they will come back. Now, if there are trust issues in the relationship, then it gets really difficult, because if one person's asking to leave, if the other person doesn't trust them to come back, then the other person's not going to let the other person or give them the permission to leave. So you have to be able to trust each other. So for the person who's asking for the timeout, you have to reassure your partner that you're coming back. And you have to demonstrate it time and time and time again. So every time you've asked for a timeout, you tell them when you're going to be back, or update them of where you're going, so that the other person has an idea of what's going on. You're not just leaving them in the cold and you leave for 48 hours or 36 hours and the other person doesn't know where you are. So you have to be very clear of how long you need, and if you need more, then you keep updating your partner. For the person who's waiting for the other person to come back, you're going to have to develop some healthy coping mechanisms while you wait for your partner to come back. Because the worst is when you send, a bazillion or like million texts to your partner asking them what's going on, and you have all these thoughts in your head and you just want to write them all down, and then you're going to say things that you don't mean, or write things that you don't mean, just because you have no outlet. So you have to develop some really healthy coping mechanisms during this time. And, this could be writing in your journal. Writing is a great way if you're a writer. Meditation, exercising, doing chores, watching TV, listening to music, whatever hobby you have. It could be baking, it could be cooking, it could be, talking to a friend. You have to give your partner space to decompress and come back to a calmer you, and they'll be calmer as well. And the last little tip, I know I said there's 5, but this is really just an overall thing that I've experienced, is this old saying that you can't go to bed angry, and I really don't think that's true. Yes, you can go to bed angry. The world won't end. It's foolish advice to think that you have to have your feelings all resolved before going to sleep. Because what happens to your brain the more tired it gets, the harder it is to regulate your emotions. And the harder it is for your brain to filter out what you mean versus what you're just saying in the moment. Because that's when name calling starts and real permanent damage to the other person's feelings begin. So I believe it's better to talk things out in the morning after a restful sleep. When you're sleeping, your brain does a lot of regeneration and healing to process things. So it's actually a really good moment, if it is late in the night and you're both exhausted, just take a break and go to sleep and talk about it the next morning or when you have a chance, and make sure you actually bring that conversation up. So instead of don't go to bed angry, I think it should be don't go to bed saying something that you regret. So I'd love to know, what are some tactics that you use when your emotions are heightened and it's tough to control your anger? Let me know in the comments below.